Hello out there, welcome back to everything you need to know about Mage Knight board game. My friends, I don't know what happened. I actually left the room for a couple of hours. I had most of this game in the box. I did have Arithia on the map, but something happened while I was gone, and this looked pretty serious. I wasn't going to talk about player versus player combat, but it looks like Tovok is pretty serious. He just kind of showed up while nobody was here. And I think he's going to attack Arithia. So let me explain what happens during player versus player combat. In order for Tovok to attack Arithia, he has to use 2 movement to move into this plains, because that's how much movement it takes to go there. Now he's going to attack Arithia, and I should point out that Arithia happens to be in a village. That doesn't mean anything. But if she was in a mage tower or a keep, she would be fortified, which means she would be protected from ranged attack. So what's going to happen is Arithia has a choice to make. She can either fully attend this attack or partially attend it. If she partially attends the attack, then her round order token stays up. When it's time for her next turn, she'll go ahead and take it as usual. But that will mean that any skills she has in her skill area that say once per turn, she can't use because it's not her turn. She's not going to be able to process her end of turn, meaning she can't draw more cards. She's not going to be able to use any special or healing effects. She's just going to be able to do whatever she needs for this combat. She's also not going to be able to take 1 mana die from the source because, as I said, you can only do that one die per player per turn, and this is not her turn. So she's limited on what she can do, but she will get a turn next time. Her other option is to fully attend the attack. If she fully attends the attack, then her round order token gets flipped down and she can do everything she normally could on her turn. She can use a mana die from the source, she can use the skills in her skill area that say once per turn, etc. Regardless, she can do anything that can happen on another player's turn. For example, she's standing on a village. She could plunder this village, meaning she would lower her reputation by 1, but she would draw 2 more cards, which could help her in combat. In addition, she could have skills like Motivation, which lets her draw 2 cards once per round. Anything else she can do on another player's turn, she can do. And then combat begins. Now, Tovok moved into her space. So Tovok is considered to be the aggressor. Okay? And she's the defender. There are only 2 phases of combat. There are the ranged and siege attack phase, and the melee attack phase. I'm nervous right now. He actually looks pretty serious about this. In the ranged and siege attack phase, the defender is going to go first. She's considered to be the attacker. The aggressor is now the blocker. So she's going to spend any ranged and siege attack effects that she wishes. Tovok can spend any block that he wishes. And even if you can't fully block an attack, you can expend block points and use block effects, because every 2 points of block lowers the attack by 1. Okay? So you can partially block an attack, and every 2 points of block that you spend will block the range and siege attack by 1. You look at the armor of the blocker. You need to have as many points of damage as they have armor. And if you do, then you can wound them. Okay? Unlike in regular combat, you can choose if you wound the hero or wound their units, keeping in mind that the units might have certain resistances. So, for example, if you're Arithia and you're throwing a fire attack at him, a ranged fire attack or siege fire attack, be aware that his units might have fire resistance, so you'd need twice as many points to do a wound. Or you can wound the hero. When she's done with her range and siege attack, then Tovok becomes the attacker, and Arithia becomes the blocker. And now he can spend any siege and range attacks that he wishes. Okay? She can block, and for every 2 points of block, she lowers his attack by 1. And then he can choose how to assign damage. If there's enough damage to match her armor, he can wound her. He can either wound her or her units. Again, this goes back and forth, and then it's her turn again. They can take turns being the attacker and the blocker until they both pass on range and siege attack. Then it goes on to the second phase of combat, which is melee attack. Melee attack means any attack, ice attack, fire attack, cold fire attack, any range and siege effects. They can use any amount of attack they want to, and now Tovok is going to be the attacker, and Arythea is going to be the blocker. After he's passed on using attack effects, Arythea is going to be the attacker, and Tovok is going to be the blocker. Now, in addition to wounding each other, which means they can do enough damage to match the other one's armor, they can do something else which is interesting, and that is they can steal artifacts. Now in this case, Arythea has some artifacts in her deck. And as a matter of fact, she's holding an artifact or two in her hand. She also has this banner of fear, which is attached to the illusionists, who are healthy, they're not wounded. The artifacts in her deck, the artifacts in her hand, and the artifacts that are banners attached to a healthy unit cannot be stolen. They're safe. However, a banner that's attached to a wounded unit, or an artifact that's been spent and is in the play area, for example, she just used Horn of Wrath for the siege effect, or an artifact in the discard pile, in this case Book of Wisdom, has been discarded. Any of these three artifacts can be stolen, and to do that, Tovok must be able to inflict 5 points of damage. He can then spend those 5 points of damage to steal the artifact from her. If it's a banner attached to a healthy unit, if it's an artifact in the deed deck, or an artifact in her hand, he can't steal it. Okay? And likewise, she could steal an artifact from Tovok if he had one in his discard pile, play area, or a banner attached to a wounded unit. I'm just going to separate these two because they just look like they're about ready to go at it. Okay. The other thing they can do, and this is how you determine who wins a battle, okay? Movement. Either of these two, the attacker or the blocker, well, the attacker, can spend as many move points as it takes to move to another space on the map. For example, if Tovok could deal 2 points of damage to Arythea, he could choose to move her here, or here, or here. If it's nighttime and he had 5 points of damage, he could move her here if he wanted to, although that wouldn't make much sense because she could throw away one of the wounds he gave her at the end of her turn and she would get a black mana token. But he could spend as many movement points as he wanted to by dealing that much damage to move her to another area. And then he stays in this space and she's been forced to retreat. If she gets moved to a place that's not a safe space. For example, let's say that there's an orc here, okay, and he decides to move her here. This is not a safe space. She then has to go through forced withdrawal, which means she has to backtrack one space until she gets to a safe space. And for every space that she withdraws, she takes another wound to her hand. Okay? Now, they can both pass, and neither of them be forced to move, in which case the combat is considered to be a draw. If it's a draw, then nothing happens. Nobody gains any fame. However, if the victorious player is of a lower level than the one forced to retreat, he gains 1 fame plus 2 fame for each level he is lower. If he's of the same level but has lower fame, then he gains 1 fame. And if he is of the same or higher fame, then he gains nothing. So that is how player versus player combat works. Again, if either of these two, or if the blocker is on a fortified site, that would be a keep or a mage tower, then he or she would get fortification. Remember, you can deal wounds by dealing as much damage as it takes to match that hero or unit's armor, keeping in mind the units might have resistances to some of the attacks you've used. You can also steal artifacts by spending 5 points of damage and taking an artifact from a wounded unit, the play area, or the discard pile, but not from a healthy unit, not from the deed deck, and not from the hand. And I should also mention, I don't know if I brought this up before, that if you were to play an effect, like let's say a fire attack. Okay, so you play Fire Attack 3. You charge this with red mana, and you decide you need Fire Attack 4. You can play a card sideways to give you Attack 1, but what will happen is this entire attack becomes Attack 4. Okay, it loses the element of fire when just one of these cards is played sideways. So keep that in mind as well. But anyway, that's a little bit about player versus player combat. I'm actually going to take this game and I'm going to put it away. I'm going to keep these Mage Knights separate because they looked very, very serious just then. I'm going to get the Panda and the Gardener out of my Takanoko box and I'm going to mix that in just to make sure that we don't have any violent occurrings because this game can be very, very, very intense. And that's everything you need to know so far. So we're going to move on to episode 25. We're going to revisit how to take a complete turn. And then we'll be ready to look at some variants and different scenarios for the game. So I hope you're having fun with this game. It's certainly a lot of fun. Until next time, GLHF. Good luck, have fun.